April 19th, 1775. The first light of dawn spills across the quiet fields of Lexington, coating the damp grass in a pale golden glow. A ghostly mist curls low to the earth, rolling gently between wooden fences and farmhouses, swallowing the sounds of morning birds. The world feels heavy with expectation, as though even the land itself senses what is about to unfold. Dozens of farmers, fathers, sons and brothers, stand shoulder to shoulder, their muskets clutched tightly in trembling hands. Their breaths rise in shallow clouds, disappearing into the cool spring air. Across the field, a line of British redcoats advances in perfect practiced formation. Polished bayonets catch the faint light, glinting like tiny fires, a silent reminder of imperial authority. The distant cadence of marching boots echoes like a drumbeat of empire, a rhythm that has ruled these lands for over a century. Behind them lies the weight of history. Ahead of them waits a future they cannot yet imagine. And then, silence. For one suspended heartbeat, the entire world holds its breath. Suddenly, a single musket cracks through the still morning air. No one knows who fired it, but history would remember it forever as the shot heard round the world. That one sound would ignite a revolution, set 13 colonies ablaze, and give birth to a new nation. For more than a century, Britain's 13 colonies stretched along the Atlantic coast, their towns bustling with merchants, sailors, farmers, and artisans. They were loyal to the distant crown, yet growing increasingly independent in thought and identity. From Virginia's golden tobacco fields to Boston's crowded harbors, life flourished. Families built new worlds on land carved from wilderness, believing themselves both British and something more. But victory in the 7 Years' War came at a steep cost. Britain emerged triumphant, but buried under massive debt. Across the Atlantic, Parliament sought to refill its treasury, and the colonies became its answer. Taxes came one after another, on sugar, paper, glass, paint, and tea. To London, it was justice. The colonies should help pay for their own defense, but to the colonists it was an insult, a betrayal of their rights. They were taxed without representation, treated not as citizens but as subjects. In crowded taverns, whispers turned into debates. Dockworkers slammed their fists on rough oak tables, merchants muttered beneath their breath, and farmers paused their plows to question the authority of a distant king. The sense of injustice seeped into every corner of colonial life, carried by pamphlets that fanned the flames of defiance. Boston became the beating heart of rebellion. Its narrow streets echoed with protests and fiery speeches. In March 1770, tensions reached their breaking point when British soldiers opened fire on an unarmed crowd, killing 5 colonists in what would be known as the Boston Massacre. The cobblestones were washed clean, but the memory stained the city forever. 3 years later, on a frigid December night, a small band of colonists moved silently through the darkened streets toward Boston Harbor. Disguised as Mohawk warriors, they crept aboard British ships under the pale glow of the moon. The creak of wooden planks gave way to the splintering of crates as axes crashed through timber. Chest after chest of British tea tumbled into the black, icy waters. The harbor churned with defiance. Lanterns glimmered faintly on shore as crowds gathered in tense silence, watching history unfold beneath the winter sky. By dawn, news of the event spread like wildfire. London called it treason. The colonies called it freedom. King George III responded with fury. Boston's ports were sealed shut. Soldiers marched openly in the streets. Colonial assemblies were dissolved, voices silenced, and liberties stripped away. Yet instead of breaking the colonies, the king's iron grip bound them together tighter than ever before. From Virginia's plantations to New England's cobbled squares, whispers of rebellion merged into a single unified roar. Committees formed, militias trained in hidden fields. Muskets were tucked away in barns and cellars, ready for the day they would be needed. By the spring of 1775, that day had come. British troops marched toward Concord to seize colonial weapons, but the colonists were ready. Lanterns swung from horseback as riders thundered across sleeping towns, their hooves pounding against frozen earth. From farmhouse to farmhouse, a single cry carried through the night. "The British are coming!" At Lexington Green, as dawn broke, farmers stood motionless on dew-soaked grass. The distant rumble of boots grew louder, each step pulling them closer to history. Fear and resolve mixed on their faces, but none stepped back. The clash came swiftly. Muskets thundered, smoke rolled across the field in twisting plumes, swallowing shouts and screams alike. When silence finally returned, bodies lay still in the grass. But the unthinkable had happened. Ordinary colonists had faced the most powerful army in the world, and survived. Word of Lexington and Concord raced across the colonies like a living fire. From whispered prayers to fiery sermons, voices rose in unison. The choice was no longer rebellion or loyalty, it was freedom or submission. In Philadelphia, the Second Continental Congress convened beneath tall windows and warm summer air. Representatives from all 13 colonies crowded into the chamber, their arguments fierce, their decisions fateful. Out of their debates came a single resolution. The colonies would stand together. They formed the Continental Army, placing its command in the hands of George Washington, a tall, stoic Virginian, whose quiet strength would soon be tested beyond imagination. Washington inherited not an army, but a patchwork of militias bound by hope more than discipline. Across the countryside, pamphlets fanned the flames of independence. None struck deeper than Thomas Paine's Common Sense, a bold declaration that shattered old loyalties. A continent should not be ruled by an island. By July 4th, 1776, the Declaration of Independence was signed. Jefferson's words, etched in ink by candlelight, carried across the ages. "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal." Church bells rang, crowds cheered, but celebration was fleeting. On the battlefield, disaster loomed. New York fell, Philadelphia burned, supplies vanished, soldiers deserted in despair. Then came the bitter winter of Valley Forge. Snow buried the ground in silence as men huddled around dwindling fires, their bodies frail, their stomachs empty. Frostbite claimed fingers and toes, and blood stained the frozen earth where boots had worn through. Washington walked among them, sharing their misery, offering words where supplies failed. Against all odds, they endured. Out of suffering came strength. By autumn 1777, at Saratoga, the Continental Army struck back. Against overwhelming odds, they delivered a stunning victory, shattering British confidence and reshaping the war. France, watching closely, finally believed. French ships crossed the Atlantic, their sails bright against grey skies, carrying guns, gold and soldiers to a cause now impossible to ignore. For the first time, the colonies were no longer alone. With France's entry into the war, everything changed. For the first time, the rebellion had allies with ships, guns and gold. Yet victory was far from certain. In the southern colonies, the war burned like wildfire. Cities fell and rose again. In the Carolinas, guerrilla fighters emerged from dense forests like ghosts, striking British patrols and vanishing back into the shadows before the enemy could respond. These men, farmers by day, rebels by night, became the living embodiment of defiance. British commanders, frustrated and stretched thin, underestimated the determination of a people fighting for their homes. At every river crossing, every field, every farmhouse, the rebellion took root in ordinary lives. But even as resistance grew, hardship deepened. Families were torn apart, brothers stood on opposite sides of the war, one in a red coat, one in homespun militia rags. Fields went untended, businesses collapsed, and hunger became a second enemy. In 1780, the British captured Charleston, dealing the rebels a crushing blow. Yet out of defeat came resilience. Generals like Nathaniel Greene reorganized shattered forces and led them through a grueling campaign across the South, refusing to yield even when outnumbered. Meanwhile, Washington prepared for his boldest gamble yet. With French aid secured, he began laying the foundations for a decisive strike. Letters carried by horseback raced across the colonies, coordinating movements hundreds of miles apart. Supplies were gathered, strategies whispered in candlelit rooms, and hope kindled once more. Autumn 1781, Yorktown. On the shores of Virginia, Cornwallis and his British forces fortified their positions, unaware that the noose was tightening. Washington's army marched south with French troops at their side, while the French Navy sealed off the Chesapeake Bay. By October, Yorktown was surrounded. For 9 relentless days, cannon fire shook the earth. The thunder of bombardments rolled like a storm across fields and hills, drowning out prayers whispered in darkened tents. Smoke filled the sky as night turned into day beneath the burning light of war. Soldiers fought not just for victory, but for an idea. That ordinary people could govern themselves, free from kings and empires. Finally, Cornwallis, battered and trapped, had no choice. On October 19, 1781, he surrendered his sword. The impossible had become reality. Farmers and merchants had humbled the most powerful empire on earth. Yet even in victory, the struggle was not over. For 2 more years, negotiations dragged on, armies lingered in their camps, and uncertainty loomed. Only in September 1783, with the signing of the Treaty of Paris, was the dream of independence secured. In candlelit chambers, maps were redrawn. A new name appeared across the world, the United States of America. 13 stripes, 13 stars, endless possibilities, and endless challenges, because independence was imperfect. Women remained voiceless in government. Indigenous nations who had their own stake in this conflict faced displacement from ancestral lands. Enslaved people remained in chains, despite the ideals inked on parchment. The revolution planted the seeds of liberty, but the fruits would take generations to ripen. Still, something irreversible had begun. The shockwaves spread far beyond America's shores. In France, whispers turned to roars as a monarchy trembled. In Haiti, the enslaved prepared to rise and forge the first free Black Republic. Across Europe and Latin America, the old order quaked beneath the weight of a new idea, that power belonged not to kings, but to the people. This was more than a war. It was a statement, a promise, an identity forged from defiance and hope. Its echoes still reach us today, in every debate about liberty, in every fight for equality, in every struggle for self-determination. The American Revolution was the first domino, the spark that lit the fuse of a world forever changed. This was the first epoch of change, but history was far from finished. Because ahead lay other battles, other revolutions, other moments where the course of humanity would shift once more, from the rise of industry to the fight for civil rights, from cultural awakenings to digital frontiers. This is just the beginning. Subscribe to Epoch of Change and join us as we uncover the revolutions that shaped our world.